Outstanding. Welcome everybody. I'm really excited here because this is a topic I think people need to hear about. But before we get into that, I want to do a quick introduction. My name is Jason Bates. I'm a transaction coordinator with Finish Line TC Services. The guest I have with me, she is the co-founder of Finish Line TC Services. So there's no one better to talk to about this particular topic. I'm a transaction coordinator, a real estate investor. I specialize in buying and operating RV parks, and I also have a fund for raising private capital, and that is Venture Vibes Fund. But I want you guys to hear a little bit about Jennifer. Um, a little bit about her, where she came from, and then we'll get into why this topic is so important.
Hey Jason, thank you so much. So yeah, as you said, I'm the co-founder of Finish Line TC Services. We have now been in business for about almost 3 years now. It's crazy how fast time goes. But with that being said, I mean, I've been a transaction for that long, and aside from that, I'm also a real estate agent in Connecticut. And I'm also an investor myself. So throughout the process, I have gotten to see transactions from different standpoints, from a agent's perspective, an investor's perspective, a transaction coordinator's perspective. And that's why we have this podcast, is to be able to share certain things with you guys that we've seen along the way. And also, if you guys are listening to our podcast and you're like, hey, I have something to share, definitely reach out to us because we would love to bring you guys on the podcast as well.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. So, uh, you know, Jennifer and I brainstormed on this, and we thought the most value to bring to people is to understand exactly what does a transaction coordinator do specifically in creative deals, right? Because transaction coordination has been around for a long time, probably as long as real estate agents have been have been buying and selling real estate. But really, the rise in the creative space, especially post COVID, where interest rates are getting crazy, creative deals have really skyrocketed, and it's not just in real estate, it's in the purchases of businesses, the purchase of vehicles. And so a creative friendly transaction coordinator who understands all the ins and outs ends up becoming invaluable within the transaction. So basically, we want to kind of break down, kind of what a TC does with respect to creative deals. Because here's what I hear all the time, and Jennifer, you might be able to hear some different things as well. But what I hear all the time is, "Oh, you guys just do documentation. You guys just push paperwork. You guys just review contracts." And you and I both know it's way bigger than that. And the analogy I like to use is we're just project managers, and the project's just 30 days long, right?
Hmm.
So we've got stakeholders, and that's the buyer, the seller, the realtor, the escrow agent, the escrow attorney, as well as any lenders and borrowers, right? So those all become part of the transaction as well. So we've got stakeholder management, and because of that, we have communication plans. So how are we coordinating all the communication with all these people? We have risk management. A deal can go south at any given minute. And so it's our job to kind of stay a couple steps ahead of that, partnering with the escrow officer, of course, making sure everything is moving forward. We are schedule management. So we've got day one open escrow, day 30 close of escrow. And what are the things we need to navigate to get from point A to point B? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm very happy that we're putting this topic out there because I mean what people think is not wrong, and here's why.
Mhm.
The industry has set a standard for what transaction coordinators, what they are and what they do. Because transaction coordinators primarily originally worked with real estate agents. And now things are a little bit more different, right? Now, people are doing more and more creative finance. The transaction coordinators do two different things, right? Something that a traditional transaction coordinator would do is completely different than what a creative transaction coordinator would do. And that's why we're going to break it down for you guys so that you understand what the difference is and why it is important to choose the right transaction coordinator based on your transaction, because it's not a one size fits all, right? There are multiple different types of transactions. And so you want to make sure that the transaction coordinator that you're working with specializes in that particular transaction. Because if you don't, that could be the end of your deal.
100%. And you and I see this all the time. Creative deals actually fall apart at the paperwork stage more than any other stage of a real estate purchase, right? You might have the best of intention, you might be a master negotiator and you've just penciled a great deal that not only wins for the seller, but wins for the buyer. But if your documentation, your paperwork isn't structured right and you don't flow it through the process properly, so every I is dotted and T is crossed, that's where things get missed. Would you agree?
Absolutely. So let's get into a real estate transaction coordinator. So somebody that is specifically working with a real estate agent. And I'm
Mhm.
sorry, I should have used the term retail transaction
Yeah.
coordinator. So this is
Great point.
something where you have a seller and then you have a buyer that's not an investor. They're going to move into the property and they're going to live there, for long term or however long they plan on living there. Now, a transaction coordinator is going to work directly with the real estate agent. They will still communicate with all parties. They're doing less of a consultative matter. They're more just reviewing the paperwork, making sure that the timelines are being met. If they are on the listing side, a lot of the times they are setting up things up for the listing, photos, staging, and things like that. Again, they're not usually having conversations with the seller. That is the real estate agent's job, right? They are
Yeah.
supporting the real estate agent with anything that they need done, any administrative duties. They are not filling out contracts. Um, they are a lot of the times they are opening escrow. They're still opening up escrow, ordering title searches. They are not reviewing them. That is solely the real estate agent's role. And then they get to the closing table. And it's pretty straightforward. They're just making sure that the buyer has done everything they need to do with their loan and that everything is moving the way it's supposed to. And then the deal closes, and that is it. That is the end of the transaction. So, very straightforward in the real retail side. Like I said, the biggest difference I think is the consultative side. So it's more less conversational and it's more just a routine of the same thing every day because a lot of these buyers, they're purchasing with a loan. And so the loan officer is doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to requesting documents, making sure that the loan is moving the way it's supposed to get to the closing table on time.
So would you say that at least with retail TC, it's you have predictable steps, you have predictable contracts, and then the parties involved are predictable. Like you said, you have a mortgage loan officer, you have a real estate agent, you have a buyer, you have a seller.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of the times, the contracts, you said predictable, a lot of the times, the contracts, because they're working specifically with a certain agent, whether they're in-house, maybe they're only working with this one agent, or maybe they're working with multiple. They are using the NAR contracts. So the
Right.
contracts that are for real estate agents. So it's always pretty much going to be the same thing. It may vary from state to state, but for the most part, it's always going to be the same.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And this is and this next topic is my favorite. So creative TCs, they definitely operate differently in the creative space, right? And some of the
Mhm.
examples are subject to, for those of you guys new to that, that means subject to the existing debt. That means if I'm a buyer, I'm going to buy that property subject to the seller's existing debt, which means that the debt will stay in the seller's name. I will make payments on that debt as part of my obligation for buying the property. And then the property gets deeded to either myself or preferably my LLC because if this is for business, you want to make sure you've got a nice, strong LLC to put your properties in. Then there's seller finance. I mean, that's just basically whereas now the seller's the bank, so you don't have to go down to your Chase, your Wells Fargo, and try to get a mortgage. So now you're negotiating directly with the seller as the bank. And then there's a wrap. Or a hybrid, right? Those are kind of the same where a hybrid is kind of subject to with a piece of seller finance, and a wrap might be you're buying it subject to, but you're going to go around and sell it to an end buyer by adding your additional terms on top of it. And that's where things start to get a little different from the retail TC to the creative TC.
Yeah, and I mean, you've gone through the different types of transactions. And then the funny thing is that even with those transactions, not every transaction is the same because
Yeah.
each of those transactions may have their own nuances. Whereas, like on the retail side, there aren't really any nuances. It's pretty much the same thing consistently for the most part. Not that
Mhm.
there wouldn't be a one-off here and there, but you see it more on the creative side.
Yeah. And that's very true. And that's where the we can push away from that stereotype that we're just paper pushers, right? Because now we're often keeping the contract, title, lender, investor all on the same page. And as that can start to go south, especially when you've got these people that think they can go direct to escrow or direct to the seller, and they want to bypass the TC. That's when I've seen things start to go south. How about you?
Oh, 100%. 100% because people tend to think that I'm going to treat this transaction just like I did the last one and the one before that. And that can be the furthest from the truth because now you throw other things into the mix. Well, now you have a private money lender thrown into this, or now you have a gator lender thrown into the mix, or like there's just so many different things that can change where it wasn't exactly the same to the last one. And just cutting out a transaction coordinator can actually end up costing you thousands or even worse, the deal.
And yeah, and that's true. I'll give you an example of a transaction I had. So, a lot of escrow companies are now going more to the online portal, and all the communication goes through the online portal versus email, right? So I had this client where I'm constantly talking to. I thought I was talking to everybody. I thought I was talking to the buyer, the seller, and the escrow agent on the portal. What I found out is the buyer was communicating outside of that and then
Mm,
yelling at me saying I'm not responding to escrow at all. And I'm saying, look, I'm having full conversations with escrow inside of the portal, which is what they asked me to do. And you're included in every one of those pieces of conversation. And there was a huge communication breakdown, and they wanted to blame the TC. And then I had to remind them, oh, look, you signed a TC service agreement that says that the transaction coordinator would be the point of contact for everything. So he felt that I wasn't performing at a level that he was expecting, but that's because he wasn't monitoring the messages that came in and out of the portal.
mm. Yeah, and that's one of those things where like investors have to remind themselves, right? If you are hiring a professional to take care of your transaction, please do not start cutting them out and not including them in emails or responding to things before talking to your transaction coordinator. We're not going to give you legal advice, but we know how these transactions go. We know the nuances. We know how to handle those things. And if you're paying a transaction coordinator, somebody that's going to get it to the finish line, let them handle it because sometimes that ends up complicating the transactions because you've already said one thing and now they're doing another, and it just ends up being way more complicated than it should be.
Yeah, and that's a great point because I've seen the trend change over the last 3 years. It went from trying to educate people why a TC is important. So we've got that message out there now. Every investor seems to understand why a transaction coordinator is important. Now, what we're trying to train the investors on is letting go. Like, okay, you've hired us, you
Right.
took that step. Your superpower isn't taking this through close of escrow. Your superpower is getting your next deal or preparing for the flip or finding an end buyer. That's your superpower. So please take a step back, trust in the process, and know that we're going to keep you involved in every step of the transaction. So you will always be in the know.
Yeah. So, Jason, tell me, as a transaction coordinator, somebody that has never used one within the creative space, what does a transaction coordinator actually do?
Oh, that's a great question. So first of all, I like to say that I'm in the position to tell the emperor he's not wearing clothes, basically, and what that means is I'm keeping an eye on the transaction from start to finish. So I'm reviewing all incoming documents. I'm reviewing all reports that are coming through the title company. I'm helping to mitigate potential issues. That could cause this transaction to maybe go sideways, and I'm coordinating all that. I like to say is I'm taking all those egos because, and I say egos not in a negative way, but it takes a pretty strong ego to convince the seller to sell the property creatively and then take the transaction through close. It takes a pretty strong ego for a um, seller to go, look, I'm going to try something I've never tried before because I'm not getting the asking price I was. And a creative structure seems to hit the targets I'm looking for. And so taking those things. And what I've also noticed too is there's a lot of seasoned investors that understand the creative structure, but they only understand the front end. How do I put it together into an LOI? Now, taking that and helping them make sure their contract is clean, making sure their addendums are accurate, and then flowing that through the title process so that it's translating to the promissory note properly, that it's translating to the mortgage or deed of trust properly, making sure that the title commitment is accurate with both a lender's policy, if there's a lender involved, and the title policy, making sure that the title itself is clean, no liens, via, tax liens, child support liens. I mean, I've seen everything from, mechanics liens on water softener systems to this person hasn't paid child support in 9 years to this person never even had a kid. Why do they have a lien on their property? So, and I've run into that before too, right? Is I don't know why there's a lien on my property. Can you check? And then you find out, oh, that's a different middle name. And then you get that cleared and everybody moves on. For
Mhm.
the most part, a lot of the stuff that are attached to these documents, most people have never seen in their life and they've owned the house for years.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? What's funny too? Well, I tend to see a lot is liens not getting released.
Yeah.
And so, like, even let's say you used a transaction coordinator for a PML deal. So, for those of you that are new to the space, PML is private money lending. So, a private money lender could be a regular Joe Schmo wanting to invest in real estate. They don't want to maintain a property. They don't want to do any of those things. They just want to invest their money and get a return.
Yeah.
So, when you as the borrower pay off that private money lender, you want to make sure that that gets released. And that document needs to be signed and sometimes notarized, depending on the state, by the lender, right? Your private money lender. And then it needs to get recorded in the county. A lot of the
Mhm.
times we see that those private money lending deals, they don't get released. So then they just sit there. And then what ends up happening is later on when they go to try and sell this property or a title search gets done because maybe they have another private money lender, that lien is still on there. And
Yeah.
so now you have to chase down this private money lender that maybe you haven't spoken to in months or years, and maybe you can't get a hold of them. And now it's such a big issue. Whereas, like, you want to make sure that, those things are getting taken care of because if they don't get released, they just stay on there.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And then it adds more time to something that shouldn't have taken that much time. You're absolutely right.
Oh, yes. Closings
And-
have
Go ahead.
closings have gotten extended quite a bit for those liens that are waiting, especially like mechanics liens. Oh, the mechanics liens, you can reach out to these companies and it's not like it happens overnight. You will not get your release right away. And sometimes they have to send it through mail. And now you were planning on closing on such and such day, and now it takes a lot longer. That can be detrimental to a transaction, especially if it's something that's in foreclosure.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that is huge because the seller is trying really hard to get out of out from underwater. And you're right, the clock is ticking once foreclosure starts. So that's a great point.
Absolutely.
And there's two other things that I've noticed that make creative transaction coordination a little different than retail is one of them is now let me preface this with there are a lot of escrow companies out there that understand creative finance. There's a lot more now than there have been in the past. But some of what we do is sometimes we're a teacher. Like sometimes, title and escrow can get confused on some of these creative transactions. So a lot of times the TC is guiding them through that process and making sure nothing gets dropped, especially with a subject to or wrap. And then the second thing I noticed that's really different is communication is more constant with creative. You're checking in daily or near daily on a creative contract, where on a conventional contract, and I've done some probably a lot less than you, Jennifer, but there'll be days where there's just dead silence because they're in underwriting with the mortgage loan officer, they're waiting for an inspection or an appraisal, and it's just quiet for days. So a TC seems a lot busier on a creative contract. Are you seeing that as well on your side?
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing, I mean, you touched on the communication part, which is extremely important. But transaction coordinators, especially a transaction coordinator that has a ton of experience and has a way of speaking, can put sellers at ease.
Yeah.
right? Because I mean, how many times haven't you heard from an investor like, I think the seller's getting cold feet.
Yeah.
They're worried about this, they're concerned about that. And a lot of the times, the transaction coordinator can actually save the deal just by explaining to them like, hey, this is the process, this is completely normal. These are the things that we can do to ensure that you're protected and so on and so forth. So, the communication is huge in creative deals. If the transaction coordinator is not communicating, that means your deal is heading down the wrong path, right?
Yeah. And that's true. A TC could make or break a deal once you open escrow. That is 100% true. And let's face it, the way the human brain works, if you don't understand something, you're just going to say, "Never mind, I don't want to do it."
Exactly.
So yeah, so having somebody that could pivot in real time and go to the seller and say, "Hey, these are the steps we're doing, and here's why we're doing it." I had to. I'll use a real world example. So I was helping a couple with a sub two, and the seller was kind of non-responsive. So everything, all communication was going through his sister. It was a sale of a property. The mother who was on the note on the deed had passed away, so we had to had to deal with those documentation. But trying to get the seller to understand the sub two process, I had to explain to the sister why the insurance had to stay on the property at least until the buyer post close decides to replace it with their own insurance. And so it's just that she didn't know. She goes, "Well, why does my brother have to stay on the insurance?" And then I had to explain, "Well, your brother's still attached to the mortgage, and therefore the mortgage company insists on insurance. And so if your brother's insurance isn't in place, the bank will jump up and down, and then we start digging into a whole bunch of additional problems." So that was just one example where just a 5 minute conversation helped her understand. She goes, "Oh, okay, I get it. We want to move forward with the transaction."
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're on that topic of post close, that is when you're handling creative transactions, that is extremely important. I cannot stress that enough. Post closing, I see it as like another part of the transaction. It's like,
Mhm.
you have the beginning part and then you have like the aftermath. And that literally can take another 30 to 45 days. And it's something that you don't want to rush. You want to make sure that everything is in order. And I tend to see investors, that think that, okay, I can handle the post-closing side, no problem, easy peasy, which is not, because it also comes with its own nuances, but they tend to forget, right? And here's why. Investors, their main focus is to do what? Find more deals, right?
Yep.
So if they close this one and now they're excited. Now they're ready to find their next deal. Maybe they already had something in the pipeline. And so that's where things tend to fall by the wayside. And a transaction coordinator that handles post-closing, because not all do, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just make sure that you are finding that out on the front end if they handle the post-closing. Um, you know, they're the ones that are making sure that the insurance is set up correctly, that servicing is set up, that the documentation gets to where it needs to go. Because especially with like a sub two or hybrid deal where you have a ton of documents, you have specific documents that need to go to the lender, that need to go to the insurance company. And the last thing you want to do is inadvertently send the wrong document to the wrong place and you trigger the do on sell clause, which we are seeing it happen more and more often, right? Because there's more default and things like that. So definitely do not skip out on using a transaction coordinator, handling the post, having them handle the post close part as well, because it can honestly cost you more than what you've invested probably, especially if you're getting into a deal with little out of pocket.
Which is why I love the way you structured Finish Line TC Services, because you have a dedicated post-close team. They do nothing else but post-close. So their level of expertise with post-closing is much higher than the rest of us. I've been TCing for 3 years now, and I own sub twos and creative, and I will still bring in a post-close TC for my transactions. I mean, you helped me with my last purchase of an RV park because I know someone who that's all they do, live, eat, breathe, sleep, post close. They're going to see the blind spots that I will inevitably miss, because like you said, once I closed, I started moving over to how to get the property operational, and then moving on to my next purchase.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean it takes a ton of time off of, off of, or it saves you a ton of time as an investor. And that's where the transaction coordinator like really flourishes, is like being able to give you back an extra 10 to 15 hours per transaction, and even longer if there's
Yeah,
post close that needs to be done. Like that, think about how many calls you can be doing in just 1 hour,
yeah.
in just 1 hour, right? So
Right.
if you're getting back like 20 hours back into your time, how many deals can you lock up during that time?
Yeah, and if you ever read Dan Martell's book about buy back your time, you should have an hourly value of what your time is. So do the math if you get 20 hours back.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah. I mean, just getting one transaction, and I know that there are some really good closers out there. Let's say you just get one transaction during that buyback time, right? You've
yeah.
bought back your time, you were able to secure another deal. I mean, and let's say you're wholesaling it. I mean, what's the average wholesale deal? It's like 10, 15 grand, right?
Mhm.
So imagine a transaction coordinator that's not even going to cost you even half of that, not even half of that, has saved you all that time, and you were able to secure another wholesale deal and get another 10 to 15 grand from it. So it's definitely, definitely worth it. And now that I think that everybody should understand what the difference is between traditional transaction coordinator and creative.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think we've been clear on that one. Do you have a particular transaction you'd like to talk about that, kind of something went south, or like, I mean, I got an example where I saved, and you probably have hundreds of these, is where you save money just in the fact that you review the HUD statement and you save a client a bunch of money.
Oh my God. Yes, those famous HUD statements. So if you've closed a transaction before, you know what a HUD or settlement statement is. It's that document that gives you the breakdown, how much seller's getting, how much the buyer needs to bring to the closing table. And when it comes to a creative transaction, there's a ton of numbers on there, right? There's a ton of numbers. And think of a HUD kind of like an Excel spreadsheet, right? If you put a number incorrect on an Excel spreadsheet, it throws off the numbers, right? And yes, I've heard people say, well, then I mean, if title companies are getting HUDs incorrectly, then it's time to use a different title company. That is not the case, guys. You guys have to understand title companies and even closing attorneys, they are human as well. Okay, they are human as well. Now, remember that I said every transaction has its different nuances, right? So, a lot of these title companies and attorneys, their minds are wired to do traditional, right? So, sometimes the numbers they can get mixed up and put it in the wrong spot, or maybe the EMD was missed on the HUD, and certain things like that. And those things literally can make a ton of difference, especially with sub twos, right? Where the purchase contract says, let's say you're meeting with the seller and they don't know the exact number on how much they owe on the mortgage. And so you put a roundabout number. You're like, well, it's about 130. But the you look at the most recent mortgage statement and they actually owe 125,
Mhm.
125 and some change, right? Now, the number that the title company is going to put on that HUD, they're going to go based off your purchase contract. And so that's sometimes those things throw numbers off, right? Because the title company is not wrong. They're going based off of what you put in the contract, right? And sometimes there are also addendums along the way that maybe somebody thought they sent it to the title company and actually never did. Or maybe they forgot about it. And so I've seen crazy discrepancies like 20,000, 40,000, like difference. And I'm like,
Yeah.
man, I just saved this investor a ton of money, because had they not used a transaction coordinator, they probably would have they probably would have noticed something was off. They probably would have called the title company or closing attorney and said, "Hey, why is this off?" And as the title company or closing attorney would do, they would sit there and explain to them, "Well, this is this number, this is that number, and that's the third." And for someone that is coming from a place of authority or control, right? Because they're the ones managing the transaction. It seems right. It adds up. What they're saying, it adds up,
Yep.
but something still seems off. And that's where the transaction coordinator can say, wait a minute. No, I'm going to go back to the title company and we're going to go back and forth on this until we get it right. And a lot of the times we see that the HUD needs to be revised 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 times until it actually gets right.
True. And so here's what's really cool in the creative space. A lot of investors will negotiate who pays different parts of the closing cost too, right? So that gets highlighted in the creative contract. Now, a lot of times those don't always translate to the HUD properly, and that's another reason why we step in, right? So we can actually literally put the contract on one screen, put the HUD on the other, and start making the comparisons. And a lot of times I'll see like the investor said that they would pay their realtor fees, but it was being charged to the seller, or
Mhm.
or they got the wrong or they got the wrong wholesale fee. Or I've seen this happen recently where the seller had some tax liens on the property, and they had some tax lien on the property that they didn't disclose. So the end buyer says, "Well, I'm not going to pay for those. Those have to come out of proceeds." Well, it ended up sucking up all of the proceeds for the seller, and then they ended up negotiating with the wholesaler to take a smaller fee. So we had to make sure that those all got adjusted right on the HUD. So at the end of the day, the day or two before close, there's a lot of moving parts, and double double checking, triple checking that HUD. It not only saves money, but saves headache down the road. Because if something isn't done right, like if you got the name of an LLC wrong and you recorded it wrong on the title, oh, now you just create a whole other problem post close.
Absolutely. And anytime that there's a change, a transaction coordinator will have to put an addendum together.
Yeah.
They'll have to send it to both parties and get it signed. And sometimes,
Mhm.
like you said, sometimes even the day of closing, it's like they're scheduled for the afternoon and now it's the morning and numbers are still, there's some discrepancies, but now the seller's getting less. Now the seller's upset and there's
Yeah.
so much tension and stress and time is of the essence. And so the transaction coordinator is going to jump into action and start making phone calls. Hey, Mr. Seller. Okay, great. We came to this final conclusion. Now this addendum needs to be signed ASAP so that we can get it to the title company and get to closing on time so that we don't have to push this out another day or two in order to get this done.
Yeah. And I've seen miscommunications too, right? So someone will say, "Well, so and so said they would pay for that." So I get on the phone and they go, "I never agreed to pay for that." Okay, well, let's all get on a conference call and iron this out so that we make sure it's
Mhm.
documented properly. So again, part of what we do is peacekeeper, right? A TC is a peacekeeper. We're also a translator. So we're translating real estate talk to people that don't necessarily understand it. And then we're part operations, right? We're the operations manager for this transaction. We've got to get it across the finish line. And
Mhm.
sometimes we have to pull people kicking and screaming.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's funny sometimes how, transactions can turn into, but that's why transaction coordinators are extremely powerful. They're extremely powerful. We're able to try to keep the peace as much as possible,
Mhm.
and a lot of the times it comes down to how things are being explained, right?
Yeah.
And that brings the stress levels down for the seller, for the wholesaler, and it helps people see what it is. Now, I'm not saying that you know, we have this magic wand that we're going to wave and boom, everybody is peachy, right? Because
Right.
sometimes certain transactions can get a little messy, especially if the seller has to walk away with less because there ended up being liens that they
Yeah.
never knew about. But at the end of the day, we make sure that everything is documented. Nothing that like there should never be any oral agreements.
Yeah.
We're the ones that are going to say, well, hey, listen, that needs to be an addendum because you don't want this to come back and bite you later on.
Yeah. And that's a great point. And that's one of the strengths of a TC, right? We might get off the phone with a seller or with an escrow agent or with a wholesaler, and then we're immediately responding to the group email saying, "Look, I just got off the phone. Here's the key takeaways. I want to make sure everybody's in the know."
Exactly.
So, so I want to talk real quick about some key takeaways of transaction coordinators. So this is one of the things I wholeheartedly believe, and I believe this as an investor too, because I'm a TC and I haven't always TC'd my own deals because I believe without a strong TC, deals die, even if they're profitable. And sometimes I can't focus on the energy on my own personal deal, so I have brought in other TCs to TC my deals for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, can you break down for us the top 10 creative documents that, that we need to master?
Yeah, so the ones that come to hand, the ones that come to mind right out the gate is really if you're doing a subject to contract, you want a subject to addendum and you want to do on sale clause addendums because everything that could go south on a deal is written in there. And now both the buyer and the seller understands what actions need to be taken if you have to deal with a due on sale clause. The subject to addendum basically explains everything in writing to a seller so that they understand exactly what they're getting into. Understanding that the mortgage stays in their name, that they still need to be part of the insurance, they still need to cooperate, and turn over specific pieces of information that the end buyer needs um, in order to service that note when the buyer takes over the property. We need to understand, trust and LLC documents. We need to understand lender disclosures if there's lenders involved. We need to understand terms and working with the title attorney to make sure that those terms are within usury laws. Um, when it comes to wrap mortgages, understanding how those are structured and who gets paid what when. I had a client where he was buying on the sub two, selling it on a wrap, and I recommended that he get loan servicing for both notes because now he's being insured that the end buyer is paying him every month, and then the servicing company is also pulling the money out of his account to pay the sub two, and what's left in the account each month is his profit. And he doesn't have to spend a dime of energy on it except to update his QuickBooks to say, I got my payment in.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's wonderful. And you gave a very, detailed breakdown as to like when you're handling transactions, like these are the things that you want to, make sure that you are paying very close attention to. Now, this was a very informative podcast. And as always, we want to make sure that you guys are um informed, that you guys have the tools and the resources to handle these, not just handle these transactions, but it all starts from the moment you talk to a seller.
Yeah.
That's where things like stem from. So we want to make sure that you guys have the right tools. So if you're watching this on YouTube, comment down below checklist because we're going to be sending you guys a checklist on what you guys need to do when you are having a meeting with the seller, what things you need to obtain from them in order to get started in a transaction. Because we see this happen quite a bit where buyer and seller agree to a subject to or a hybrid deal, but nothing is collected. And there are very important things that you guys need to look at before committing to a transaction.
Yeah, I don't know how many times somebody comes in with a sub two and they don't have the latest mortgage statement and the latest insurance declaration. Those are two key documents you need for a sub two.
Absolutely. I've seen ones from like 6 months ago, like, yeah, this is what the seller had. They dug it up from their mail.
So,
Uh,
so here's the bottom line. If you're an investor doing creative deals, TC isn't a luxury; it's a survival tactic. So, if you're doing creative deals and you're tired of chasing paperwork, dealing with escrow, let's talk. Let's get on a call. We can do a Zoom just like this and just walk you through the process and show you how easy it is to do a transaction with a TC and how much time you get back and how much stress gets removed from you when using the transaction coordinator.
Yeah, so a place where you guys want to reach out to us is through our website. So our website is www.finishlinetcservices.com. And right on there, there is a button where you can submit a deal if you have one ready to go, or you can schedule a consult with Jason or my other partner, January, and we can get you guys started on your transaction right away.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love that.
All right. Well, Jason, thank you so much for doing this very informative podcast with me. And guys, we will see you on the next video.